Company insolvencies hit a record as small businesses struggle. Rio Tinto set to pay almost $10 billion to acquire Arcadium Lithium, and the Collingwood Magpies and the Brisbane Broncos are the most valuable football brands in the country. Welcome to Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. It is Thursday, the 10th of October 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, the main story this morning, company insolvencies have hit a record high with more than 6,600 firms failing in the 6 months to September, with Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria hardest hit.
The sectors struggling most are construction, accommodation and food services, retail trade, professional, scientific and technical services, and manufacturing, according to ASIC's latest data. High inflation and interest rates, cyber attacks, and too much regulation has been blamed for the jump in insolvencies. Last financial year, there were almost 10,800 insolvencies, and it has been rising steadily since the end of the government's COVID-19 supports. This year, we're on track for easily a record year. The biggest cause of failure was inadequate cash flow or excessive cash utilisation. Basically, that means companies have held on to too much cash, not used it wisely, and the business has suffered. There's also the growing problem for many businesses of the ATO chasing money. That's triggered this record level of insolvencies.
So most of these insolvencies are smaller businesses, aren't they? And that sector is really struggling at the moment.
Yeah, sure is. The Council of Small Business Organisations Australia and CommBank report into the small business sector launched yesterday highlights that small businesses are grappling with increasing costs in energy, rent, insurance, interest rates and industrial relations changes. The report says there is also a crucial shortage of both skilled and unskilled workers, and the energy transition is causing headaches. Nearly half of small businesses have yet to embark on their green transition due to financial barriers and a lack of knowledge. Long way to go there. Also, cybersecurity threats are a growing problem, with almost half of all cyber attacks targeting businesses, with cyber criminals using increasingly sophisticated methods. Bottom line here, very, very tough times for small businesses in Australia.
Sean, I'm going to ask you a question to which you may not know the answer, and I know that these are your favourite kinds of questions.
Yes, love those.
What's the future hold? What is the turning point here? When will things start to get better for small businesses? Is it interest rates starting to come down? Is it inflation back under control? Is it, power bills and other things that really kind of levelling off? What is the key factor that we're looking for here?
Well, I suppose it's all those things, but just because inflation's under control and interest rates start to fall doesn't mean that we're going to see fewer insolvencies, because it takes time to filter through the system. People have overdrafts, they have the tax office money. It's only sometime after the cycle turns that you actually see the number of insolvencies stop increasing. So the idea is sort of there's a catch-up game there. So I don't think it looks particularly promising for the sector for the next year, 2 years. I think very, very difficult times.
Okay. All right. Well, that's not good news. But look, I just asked you a question without notice, and if you would like the opportunity to do that as well to Sean, then please send your questions through, because every Tuesday and Friday we put out a bonus episode called Ask Fear and Greed, where basically I put your questions to Sean, and they can be about the economy, they can be about business, they can be about exactly what I just asked. If you want to ask the same question again, then send it on through via our website, fearandgreed.com.au, or any of the social media platforms, and we shall pop it on the list. Sean, let's take a look at local markets. How did they perform yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 closed up just a touch to 8,187 points. The buy now, pay later groups led the way. Zipco finished 6% higher. Block was up more than 4%. Mining stocks, not so good. Among the large caps, BHP, Fortescue Metals Group, Rio Tinto, throw in Santos and Woodside. They're all down sharply. So too was Goodman Group. The banks were up a touch, while Brambles, REA, Aristocrat Leisure, WiseTech Global, Coles and Woolies and Telstra all did pretty well. Shares in APA Group, the owner of the South West Queensland Pipeline, rose 2.6% after the Australian Energy Regulator issued its draft findings that the benefits of subjecting the pipeline to full regulation on tariffs would not outweigh the increased costs involved. What does that mean? Well, Michael, it took me a long time to work out all those negatives. Basically means there won't be tougher price regulation on the main pipeline that carries gas from Queensland to the south. So that may enable more gas supply to Victoria and New South Wales, which are the two states where there's a lack of gas. So kind of good news. Wish that the regulator could just put it in plain English. That's all.
But you've just done it for us. Sean.
Well, that's right.
We don't need the regulator. We've got Sean Aylmer. Sean, one company that you didn't mention just then in your general wrap of markets is Washington H. Soul Pattinson, which is the subject of today's interview, which comes up after the show. You're speaking with Gaurav Sodhi from Intelligent Investor.
Soul Patts is one of the most interesting companies on the ASX, 120 years old. It's an old-fashioned conglomerate. It's got investments in telcos, in coal mines, in major companies, in private companies, all sorts of things. And so we talked to Gaurav about how investors should view a company like that. And then we go through its different parts and we go through just how successful it's been. We also go through the things to worry about when you're investing in a company like Soul Patts.
Yeah, it's not a particularly sexy company, is it? But
I totally disagree.
It invests in bricks, Sean. It invests in bricks and coal. They are not exactly sexy kind of assets.
Telcos and all these small companies. Michael.
But this is what I was going to say. But just even looking on their website, they say, we are proud to have never missed a dividend payment since listing in 1903. It's a pretty impressive record.
That's pretty cool. And Gaurav says that for 25 years, he says 25 years, the dividend has consistently increased. And that is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it is a really interesting story. It is a great interview about a fascinating company. So stick around for that one. It's coming up a little bit later on. What's happening in international markets, Sean?
Well, a bit going on Wall Street as investors wax and wane over the further rate cut prospects in the US and the outlook around the crisis in the Middle East. Chipmaker Nvidia was 4% higher yesterday morning, bolstered by widening optimism over its artificial intelligence market dominance. Nvidia's stock has now rallied almost 15% in the last 5 sessions. It's back kind of close to its record high. 15% when you're a $3.3 trillion stock is a stack of money, shall we say. It's once again the second largest stock on Wall Street behind Apple, ahead of Microsoft. Iron ore prices have fallen further. That's on the back of a little bit of disappointment around what's going on in Beijing at the moment. Oil steadied around $78 a barrel. Reserve Bank of New Zealand cut its official interest rate by 50 basis points yesterday, and the Aussie dollar is fetching 67.5 US cents.
50 basis points? New Zealand is not messing around.
Yeah, but it just takes it down to 4.75%, whereas the Aussie benchmark's 4.35%. So they went harder, so they've got more to come down.
Okay. All right. Sean, we have a bit to get through. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Rio Tinto will pay almost $10 billion to acquire Arcadium Lithium in an all-cash deal.
Yes, the offer has been accepted by the board of Arcadium. We only found out about it over the weekend. The bid was pitched at a 90% premium to Arcadium's market value late last week. Now it needs to go to shareholders, of course. It comes at a time when lithium prices are way, way down on where they were 12 months ago. That triggered a lot of shareholders saying the bid was actually overly opportunistic. However, the Arcadium board have obviously thought a $10 billion price tag, it's actually $9.9 billion according to the Friend Review, is enough to get it across the line. Rio Chief Jakob Stausholm said Rio will use its financial firepower to accelerate project development at a time when Arcadium had been slowing projects to preserve cash. It'll basically give Rio control of a vertically integrated lithium business that provides about 5% of global supply of the battery mineral. Most of the assets are in Argentina, quite close to where Rio has a lithium mine as well. The deal will also give Rio an Australian hard rock lithium mine at Mount Catlin in the nation's southwest.
And it's just nice to have a big deal to talk about again, isn't it, Sean?
I know, but, I would have liked to have had a big deal that we could have said, yes, it's on, no, it's off for a few weeks. This one was about 4 days.
Yeah, get a few more weeks of content out of it. Now, billionaire Gina Rinehart has scaled back plans for the country's next major iron ore mine as part of efforts to overcome concerns from environment regulators and native title custodians about heritage protection, vegetation clearing, and carbon emissions.
The Mulga Downs mine that Ms. Rinehart's private companies plan to build in the Pilbara region will now produce 40% less iron ore than what was expected 2 years ago, according to documents filed with the Western Australian government this week. The shrinking of the project comes after a year in which Ms. Rinehart's companies have campaigned against the Albanese government's nature-positive reforms, which seek to protect more habitat and biodiversity, according to the Financial Review. Ms. Rinehart had originally planned to clear 8,422 hectares of vegetation to build a mine at Mulga Downs. Now, Mulga Downs is the vast pastoral property where she spent much of her childhood. It was supposed to be capable of producing 20 million tonnes of iron ore per year. The new plans involve clearing about half what was initially expected to produce about 12 million tonnes a year.
So she was essentially going to build a mine in her own backyard.
Not essentially, literally.
There you go. Speaking of carbon emissions, Sean, power stations, not cows, are emitting the most amount of methane, putting at risk net zero targets introduced by the federal government. It's been a while since we've talked about farting cows.
It has been a while. And I think farting cows really have got a bad rap because apparently it's the fossil fuel producers that are emitting twice as much methane as reported under traditional measures, according to the Superpower Institute, which is a think tank pushing for more aggressive energy transition targets. It's led by former competition czar Rod Sims. Basically, the Superpower Institute has come up with a new measurement method, and the findings challenge the long-held view that agriculture and Australia's cattle industry is driving elevated emissions, according to a report in The Australian. Now, of course, methane is different to CO2 emissions, and while there are more CO2 emissions than methane emissions are actually much more damaging. So the cows, for a long time, have been getting a bad rap, really. The report says that the significant underreporting of methane emissions under the current National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme framework underscore the need to adopt independent methods in emissions reporting. Australia has pledged to cut methane emissions by 30% from 2030, according to the Institute's new measuring tool. Queensland's Bowen Basin, which includes major coal and gas fields, is Australia's top methane emitting hotspot. Pardon the pun.
Oh,
you would have liked to say that yourself, though, wouldn't you?
I absolutely would have. Here I was too busy still just focusing on cows and flatulence.
Yeah.
Whereas you were just busting out top shelf puns.
Yeah.
9, Sean, is considering adding commercials to its Stan streaming platform now that CEO Mike Sneesby's gone. They didn't wait long.
No. So Mike Sneesby formerly ran Stan, never been a fan of ads on paid-for streaming services. He left the company last month. Media reports now suggest that Nine is considering the change. Plenty of others have done it. Netflix, Amazon Prime, Paramount Plus, Binge, they all now run ads or tiered subscription packages, some of which include ads. So Stan is kind of like the odd streamer out. Nine's share price is down 40% this year. The ad market on free-to-air is challenging at best. Hence, you can probably expect to see ads on Stan at some point in the not-so-distant future.
Labor turned independent Senator Fatima Payman has launched her new political party, and Sean, it's called Australia's Voice.
The senator said it was more than a party, more of a movement for a fairer Australia. She said Labor had lost its way, and while no decisions have been made on who to stand in the upcoming election, she suggested the party may run a candidate in Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's electorate. Not a lot of meat around policies, though Senator Payman said any member of Australia's Voice that happened to be elected would be able to vote as they like on issues, as in a conscience vote.
The Melbourne Rebels are suing Rugby Australia, claiming it was unfairly axed from the Super Rugby competition 5 months ago. and has announced plans to re-enter the competition.
The Rebels will be seeking more than $30 million in damages from the governing body, according to media reports. The Rebels are also seeking an urgent order in the federal court, granting it the right to inspect the books of Rugby Australia, including accounting and loan records, to determine whether there's been fiduciary and governance failures by Rugby Australia. The Rebels entered voluntary administration on January 29 with debts owed to creditors exceeding $23 million, including $11.5 million to the tax office. The Rebels were also struggling to pay stadium fees, and directors have received penalty notices from the ATO. Administrator PwC said the club may have operated while insolvent for more than 5 years. Yesterday, the Rebels claimed that Rugby Australia has breached various sections of the Corporations Act, has unlawfully oppressed the Rebels, and is obliged to indemnify the Rebels for liabilities to the ATO.
And just staying in the football codes, Sean, I mentioned this one at the top of the show. AFL team Collingwood is the most valuable sports club in Australia with a brand value of $145 million, while number 2 is the NRL team, the Brisbane Broncos.
Yeah, success doesn't always translate to value, according to the report by Brand Finance Australia. So the Brisbane Lions and Sydney Swans played in the AFL Grand Final, but they're ranked the 10th and 11th most valuable AFL brands. The South Sydney Rabbitohs were close to last in the National Rugby League, but that team has the 3rd highest brand value in the league. Overall, 7 AFL teams and 3 NRL teams make up the top 10. Brand Finance Managing Director Mark Crowe said the best way to boost brand is to be successful, have a rich heritage, and operate in a fast-growing market. In terms of favourite sports among Australians, Michael, AFL's 1. Guess what's number 2?
NRL?
Olympics.
See, that felt like it was a trick question.
Yeah, it was, totally. And if it wasn't 2024, probably wouldn't have been in there.
Of course not.
Yeah. Then NRL, then cricket, football, as in soccer, tennis.
Good.
Tennis and Formula 1. Tennis. You'd like tennis, wouldn't you?
I love tennis.
Yeah.
Why do you hate it so much?
I don't hate it. I mean, I love playing it. It's a great game to play, but it would have to be the most boring sport to watch.
I completely disagree. This is
Really?
Oh, absolutely. The range of shots and the fact that you can actually see everything from so many different angles and the athleticism.
Yeah.
Tennis is great. You don't think so, and you are wrong. Now, turning to international news. The US Justice Department has told a federal judge it's considering recommending that Google be broken up and forced to sell off parts of its operations to alleviate the harm caused by its monopolization of the online search market. This is big.
Huge. In fact, it's probably the biggest push since the Justice Department tried to break up Microsoft a couple of decades ago. In a court filing this week, antitrust enforcers said Judge Amit Mehta could also order Google to provide access to the underlying data it uses to build its search results and artificial intelligence products, according to a report on Bloomberg. If that happened, well, that would open a can of worms in how Google operates, and all its competitors would know exactly how. Regulators said Google gained scale and data benefits from its illegal distribution agreements with other tech companies that made its search engine the default option on smartphones and web browsers. The Justice Department is considering behavioural and structural remedies that would prevent Google from using products such as Chrome, Play, and Android to advantage Google Search and Google Search-related products and features over rivals or new entrants. The 32-page document lays out a framework of potential options for the judge to consider as the case moves to the remedy phase. Certainly big news in the tech world.
Yeah, absolutely is. Hurricane Milton, Sean, was on track to make landfall in Florida sometime this morning, Australian time, with US President Joe Biden urging people in its path to evacuate their homes.
The hurricane is heading towards a highly populated stretch of the state's west coast with winds of up to 165 miles an hour. We're talking 270 kilometres an hour. It could be among the worst storms to hit Florida in a century. Global risk advisory firm Guy Carpenter said Milton could cause the largest number of evacuations since Hurricane Irma in 2017, when 6.7 million people left their homes. Tampa Mayor Jane Castor said, and I quote, "This is literally catastrophic." Oil giant Chevron has shut down oil production at the Blind Faith platform in the Gulf of Mexico, removed staff from the site. Airports in Tampa and Orlando have closed. Theme parks like Walt Disney World, they've also closed. Let's just hope the next few hours don't turn into a disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, last story, Sean. The tech billionaires are getting richer and widening the gap between the mega wealthy and the rest.
8 of the top 10 richest people in the world made their money in technology. Tesla's Elon Musk is richest, $256 billion US. That's about the annual GDP of the country of Portugal. Meta's Mark Zuckerberg is number 2. $207 billion US. Amazon's Jeff Bezos comes in at number 3, $204 billion US, according to the Bloomberg Billionaires Index. The 8 individuals have made a total of $263 billion US extra so far this year. They've each made about $33 billion US. The 2 non-techies in the top 10 are LVMH owner Bernard Arnault, who has lost more than $10 billion this year, and Warren Buffett, legendary investor, he's made about $21 billion this year. The biggest winners this year have been Zuckerberg, his wealth's up $82 billion US, Nvidia's Jensen Huang, now $72 billion US richer, and Oracle's Larry Ellison, whose wealth has jumped by $62 billion US. The moral of the story, if you want to get rich, be a tech doyen.
Yes. Let me just duck off and do that quickly, Sean. Come up with an idea that hasn't already been come up with. That could be challenging. Up next in the Fear and Greed playlist, Sean, is the new episode of The Property Pendulum, which is a production courtesy of Fear and Greed and our friends at Domain. This week's episode is all about why some property listings leave off the price. And so you know how when you're just kind of scrolling through and you're looking at it, it's so much easier if you're a buyer and the price is listed, or the asking price, or just a general price guide is helpful. But when you see those words like price on application or expressions of interest invited, it is so unhelpful. It is a lack of transparency kind of within what's going on, and the rules are different state by state, and we really dig into that this week, kind of why this is the case, what impact it can have on the potential for underquoting, and how, if you're a buyer, to best kind of navigate that scenario. So you can find The Property Pendulum wherever you listen to podcasts. I'll put a link in today's show notes as well. And then after that, you've got Gaurav Sodhi from Intelligent Investor, all about Washington H. Sol Pattinson.
Yeah, one of the great conglomerates on the ASX. What Gaurav says, if you're looking at a managed fund, think about Sol Pats. It's a great chat.
Yeah, indeed it is. It is coming up in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It is Thursday, the 11th of October, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast, and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.